I was really honored when I was asked by the AT Center through my friend Phil Jackson to speak here. And I was also asked, what would you like to speak about when you come here? And I felt immediately drawn to the subject of self-compassion. So I want to recognize that sometimes, for so many of us, being compassionate towards ourselves can be challenging. So I want to offer these teachings in the spirit of understanding it's not so easy. However, we got to start somewhere. So I want to also preface this with, this can be baby steps. If you're already a master at self-compassion, wonderful. And if you're not, we'll start with, just for today, practice, try it on for size. Kind of like an experiment. So I came to a mindfulness meditation practice almost 20 years ago from a place of deep sadness and anxiety. I had the sense that something was very wrong with me. And I didn't know quite what. And I was in a really dark, dark place. And I had heard somewhere that meditation was good for people. And I was desperate enough to try it. So I Googled meditation classes and also checked out books from my public library on meditation and started meditating through books on tape at the time. Jack Kornfield books. And when I went to some of my first meditation classes, I was immediately challenged in that belief that something was very wrong with me. I was presented with this idea that at the time I thought was quite radical, that in fact it is quite normal and common and a feature of what it is to be a human being to confront suffering in one's life. That being in a human body, the human experience, subject to old age, death, and even just mortality in and of itself. These sensitive body, nervous systems, these sensitive bodies, is just part of what it is to be alive. And in that teaching, I felt kind of an opening in my heart. I didn't feel like my life was some personal affront, that this is just kind of part of what it is to be alive, to confront some difficulties along the way, and it wasn't my fault. And I found that kind of understanding, or that introduction of that understanding, the First Noble Truth, teaching from the Buddha, kind of an entryway to the possibility of compassion for other people and also myself, which was a really challenging idea at the time. I was so used to and practiced in self-blame. So it wasn't so easy. So in the subsequent next years, with my own mindfulness meditation practice that I became very comfortable with, I was introduced to their loving kindness meditations and sometimes compassion meditations. Just this general loving kindness to myself and others, regardless of whether they're happy, sad, didn't matter their emotional or mental state, just general kindness or compassion. A really focused kind of care specifically towards the difficult, towards myself and others when there is difficulty, to really care about that specifically, that definition of compassion. Those kind of meditation practice focused on compassion and sometimes loving kindness too, just the heart practices in general. When I was introduced to them, I thought, well, I'm a nice person, I can do that. I had an image of myself as a nice person. And what I was surprised to find out was that I had a lot of anger and a lot of discomfort when I was showing, or rather meditating on giving compassion to others and myself. It was kind of like a light shone on where my heart was covered, where my heart felt clenched, where I thought I can't really open up here. And for myself, it kind of revealed to me that this is the space where I was not being real with people. My particular edge of my personality is being very conflict avoidant, and I wanted to be nice all the time. So that led to a lot of dishonesty. So that was a painful discovery. So painful that I stopped doing those meditations for years. Kind of ignored my teachers and what they taught, and I was like, I just don't want to do this, forget it. Until a few years later, I went on a meditation retreat, multi-day residential retreat, mainly focused on mindfulness, but there was some heart practices in there, loving kindness and compassion. Ignored those and just focused on mindfulness and felt an immediate sense of anxiety and dread. For me, the mindfulness practice really got me into a space of I became very, very familiar with my suffering, but I was staying there. It was like the suffering, the suffering, the suffering. Yes, I right now it's like this. I hear it, I see it, I know how bad this is, and there is nothing else. So at one point I spoke to one of my teachers on the retreat and said, this is terrible. And she said to me, stop doing mindfulness and start doing the heart practices. Reverse it. When we're doing mindfulness in the hall, you do heart practices. When we do heart practices, go ahead and do mindfulness, but that was only once a day, really. And I thought that was terrible. But I was in a really desperate place, so I decided to listen to her. And what I found was a real surprise. I found that the heart practices gave my mind something to say yes to. The mindfulness practice made me very aware of the difficulty that I was going through. It helped me acknowledge, this is the reality. Yes, there's anxiety and stress here, and I knew that. And I needed something else. What was the next step? Yes, I'm upset. Yes, I'm sad. And what else? Do I just sit here with it? And so my mind was ready for the next step, which was, okay, now you know the suffering. Here is the juice, the lightning, the motivation, the heart. And I found that within, I was able to generate some compassion for the difficult circumstances I was in. There was nowhere else to go. This was the reality of the situation. And in a time of great difficulty, that was when I thought, maybe these heart practices aren't so bad. Maybe this compassion is actually a wise response to suffering. It goes hand in hand. There's the recognition that our mindfulness practice, this is difficult, this is hard. And the response to that difficulty, the wise response, the compassion. And that's one way meditation practice, kind of rooted in mindfulness, can have even more nuance, can be multifaceted, and maybe even take flight in a different way when we add in the heart, and especially compassion. Remember, I was teaching about compassion practice a few years ago in a meditation class, and there was the Q&A, and someone asked me, what do I do in giving compassion or focusing compassion on myself or others if I think that person in mind is not deserving of compassion? And at the time, I felt really kind of stopped in my tracks. I was like, what do I say to that? And now I feel like that was a very good question. And I want to acknowledge that for so many of us, it's very common, I think, when there's that immediate, perhaps, clench of the heart or this impulse to kind of cover it and not want to go there, so to speak, that there's so many understandable reasons why that is. I know for myself, I've come from my own histories of trauma, of difficulty, of family of origin, my own story, and plenty of heartache and grief in my own life of why I wouldn't want to open my heart. It's like it's been hurt so much. It's like I want to protect it. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So I want to acknowledge that is understandable. And the paradox of that is often for so many of us, we find ourselves wanting to have some space for even ourselves, not wanting to really acknowledge our own difficulties, let alone somebody else's. Really wanting to have space, not acknowledge what's hard. To do that is often disorienting, even isolating, when we don't even know ourselves. How can we be self-compassionate when we don't even want to see where the heartache is? We have to recognize what's there first. So as we try to protect ourselves from harm, so often what we're really doing is creating isolation, disconnection, non-presence, the opposite of mindfulness. We don't want to know, we don't want to touch into. And so we're creating even more heartache, even more isolation. The wonderful thing about compassion practice, this mindfulness of the heart practice, is that it can be one tool, one baby step into kind of the antidote to that, that it is our hearts that have their own strength, and that there is a possibility of care, of even being open to ourselves. When we kind of touch into this truth that within life there is suffering, there is difficulty. Our lives are not our faults, right? And thankfully, we may have some agency to grow towards liberation and freedom within our own lives. And that liberation and freedom can include the heart. How free are we if the heart is caged? So, and the heart can be flexible. Sometimes I think that with a meditation practice that's focused on compassion, another word for this is one of the original languages of the Buddha of his time. Compassion is the rough English translation from karuna, the Pali word karuna. Sometimes I think, or I get the impression that there may be this implicit fear for some people, and for me too at first, that to practice compassion or karuna meditation, or to even have that mindset on a daily basis, is kind of a demand, like compelling. Like, well, now that you're compassionate towards other people, you have to talk to them. You have to connect with every single person. You have to let them sleep on your couch. You have to do that. And I always feel like, actually, you don't have to do anything. This is an inclination of the mind, of a consideration that maybe there are possibilities here, that there's an open kind of field of awareness that maybe if we considered compassion for others, we would see that kind of have a more complete view of the way life is, that people aren't kind of cartoon figures of like, well, you're good or you're bad, you're this cartoon villain and I'm all great, and none of us have any gradations or multi-layered nuances. Rather, it's like, this is really complicated. We all come from our own difficulties. And that's all that is. And from there, who knows what we'll do? Perhaps, depending on the situation, we don't necessarily talk to them. Perhaps in the situation, we don't necessarily invite them on our couch. But that doesn't mean that we're in a mindset of fear or of, I've got to run away, or this kind of clenching of the heart. We can have our freedom to choose how we want to engage with people. That doesn't mean our hearts have to always come from a place of hiding or fear or disengagement or disconnection. We're inclining the mind towards a freer space, a more flexible space. It's for us, rather than, okay, everybody come in. Your discernment does not go away, right? So perhaps, if I could hear that question again from that one person, what if they don't deserve it? It's like, it's okay if you don't want to talk to them. It's like this consideration that within life, all of us have some difficulty. And then perhaps there's a consideration that the heart is worthy of our care, that our openness to considering that we're all in a very difficult place in different ways. And to care about that. We can do that in any way that feels appropriate. So maybe that's just a compassion meditation and nothing else. We don't have to get on the phone, And maybe we do. Maybe there's like, oh, I do want to. We can do whatever, You're not compelled to do something that you're not ready for. So with that kind of thought in mind, I'd like to lead everyone in a self-compassion meditation. And I want to really focus on the self-compassion part because I think it's important to experiment with it. I know it can be somewhat difficult. But I want to offer this idea, to try it on for size, this teaching from the Buddhas. He once said, and the rough translation into English is, there is no one more or less worthy of your own compassion than you. And sometimes when we do practices like this, it's just, we don't feel it. It may feel rote at best, or maybe even aversive. Like, I don't deserve this. Like, what? I don't feel it. I don't know it. And this is one of those spaces where we are planting seeds. We're merely inclining the mind, training the mind to consider the alternative from maybe our practice of, I don't deserve it, I'm this awful thing, or some self-blame. So many of us already have a practice of blame. You've already been practicing. So we're going to give the mind something else to practice with. So many of us already know our heartaches, are very well versed in our own suffering. So we're going to give the mind something else to consider. A response to our suffering that is rooted in some wisdom, that there's no one more or less worthy of our compassion than ourselves. So we'll meditate for about close to 15 minutes, maybe 12, 15. So I invite us all to find a posture that is comfortable, as well supportive of your bodily structure. Or you can sit in such a way that allows you to really sink into your seat, allowing the earth to hold you up. And if at any time you feel discomfort of any sort, please feel free to move. Any kind of discomfort in the body is a necessary hindrance to this kind of meditation. Please be comfortable in whatever way you need to be. If at any time eyes closed it doesn't feel right, it's very uncomfortable, please feel free to open them, perhaps with a soft gaze in front of you or in your lap. That option is always available to you. I invite us all to place our primary awareness within the body, starting at the top of one's head, like water pouring into a glass. Just allowing this awareness to be a simple acknowledgement of your own bodily presence. You're welcome here just as you are. Allowing this simple awareness to flow through the body, finally settling in at your feet, gently rooting you to the ground. There is no wrong way to have this experience. There is no wrong way to have a body. I offer this guidance as a suggestion ultimately. If you at any time feel like you have another practice or would rather tune out, that's totally up to you. I encourage you to follow your own counsel, and what is also true is if you want to, please tune in. I'd like to offer allowing your attention to be gently placed on the breath. And you feel called to, you may also come back to this phrase as a gentle kind of almost reminder in the mind. If you feel comfortable with coming back to where the breath is in the body over and over as their primary awareness, you can do that. Or you can have this choice to come back to this phrase, whichever you feel most drawn to. You can come back to this phrase as trying it on, seeing, discovering what it's like to contemplate this as often as you would like in this period together. May I be held in compassion. May my sorrows cease. May my heart be at ease. May I be held in compassion. May my sorrow cease. May my heart be at ease. For some of us, this phrase, or perhaps you have your own compassionate phrase, may continue to be the touchstone of meditation, where we touch into that phrase over and over again. Perhaps the mind wanders, but whenever we remember to do so, you may want to come back to that phrase. For others, you're more than welcome to stay with the breath if the phrase isn't quite right for you at the moment. Or perhaps you would like to do a mix. You're welcome to experiment. We don't have to force ourselves to feel anything in particular, to be anything. Rather, we are experimenting, discovering what this is like, and also planting the seeds on the heart, giving our minds practice, our hearts practice, with holding ourselves in compassion. Perhaps this meditation can be kind of a lab of baby steps. May I be held in compassion. May my sorrows cease. May my heart be at ease. Invite us all to place a hand in the heart space. And take a couple of deep breaths. No wrong way to breathe. No wrong way to be here. I want to thank you all for your practice, for your time and your attention. When you're ready, you're welcome to open your eyes. Thank you all so much for your presence. And we have some time. I wanted to offer a little bit of space in case there's any comments or experiences you'd like to share or any questions. Now's a good time. Yes.
So I've had a lot of awareness about my own judging nature and tendency to judge, and really am very cognizant about how that judging others has turned into fear of being judged, and it has caused me to live in dishonesty and not be open and vulnerable and to share my experience. And this kept me in isolation. What you were talking about, having a clenched heart, really resonated with me. So I'm wondering where or how best to, is there a specific way to meditate in a compassion mindset for that specific thing? Because I want to be laser focused.
Uh-huh.
I want results. So can you speak to that idea or direct me to a different mindset?
Can I ask a question? Like
Sure.
laser focused on judgment?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, ultimately, I don't know, but I have some thoughts. There's one suggestion, potentially, to do is the compassion meditation that we did today is kind of more of a general vibe kind of meditation. Often the way this is taught in many spaces, compassion is a little bit more laser focused, where it's combined with visualization, where you can start by bringing somebody to mind that you really has been very helpful to you, that you have felt that has been very supportive of you, and offer them those phrases. Then you go, after a few minutes, focus on the person, you can focus on yourself. You can open it up and focus on somebody you sort of know, neutral. And then you can go to somebody who's maybe challenging in some way. And they could be merely irritating or annoying. They don't have to be the most difficult person you know. It's kind of like you start with the baby steps. So that's one way to do it. Or you can, if you want to, bring to mind that person that you've been judging. Maybe perhaps you already know that your judgment of them is bothering you. Perhaps you can bring them to mind intentionally and offer them phrases of compassion, maybe even loving kindness, which is just general, regardless if you're in difficulty or if you're happy or you feel neutral, I'm wishing you well. And that can be the baby steps of kind of inclining the mind towards away from judgment, that you're giving your mind practice of holding that person in a space that is not judgmental. And you can do that with yourself or anybody that you want to. So that's a suggestion.
So to follow up with that, I find that, so what I hear you saying is developing a meditation practice. What about in the moment, and it's become such an ingrained habit, what about in the moment? Is there a way to direct the mind to concentrate more on compassion as opposed to judgment? Because I feel like I do it so subconsciously.
I think of where there's a there's a possibility of taking a breath. This is where a mindfulness practice in the daily life might be able to help, of recognizing what's going on. So perhaps starting from there, of naming, of acknowledging, judgment, taking a breath, like, oh, that's what's happening. And when you're able to, when you're ready, when it's not so, if you're able to remember, like, okay, compassion, but if you kind of bring in that mindfulness, that you know what you're doing when you're doing it, that's the first step. And also sometimes that breath, that mindful pause kind of breaks the momentum of the mind running with the thought. Sometimes just the pause kind of breaks the momentum. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to tag on exactly what she was saying is, she's saying mindfulness, right? So you sound to me like you're mindful of the fact that you're laser focused on said thing. And sometimes I know for me that what we've been taught is sometimes a dry practice. Like, so somebody cuts me off on the freeway, and I'm like, motherfucker. But instead, I say, I forgive you. So that's a dry practice. I might go, call that person names and go, but I forgive you. But no, I don't. You cut me off, but I forgive you. But so it's this dry practice, and because it's a practice. All of these things are practices. So compassion is a practice, and it sounds like you are mindful of the fact that you're doing it, and so replacing those judgmental words with something that you practiced in advance, giving yourself permission, practice that and see how that changes how it feels in your body.
Sometimes it's all dry. Even right now, as we did it, it could be, that's a common experience, that it's all dry.
So what is that? I'm sorry, I'm missing.
And what that means dry by that is that it doesn't feel particularly resonant, or doesn't feel like, I'm really feeling compassion, like the juiciness of like the heart open and pumping and like, yeah, I'm really caring about you and me, and this is, you really feel the heart expand. Perhaps it's just the words, it's like rote. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like you're still giving the mind practice of doing something else. Maybe one day your practice will bloom into maybe it'll really resonate, but it's okay if it doesn't. It's still worthwhile to give the mind something else to do besides judging and blaming and all of that stuff. Welcome. So we're a little past noon, so thank you all so much. Thank you for inviting me.